KWNOV family, you are listening to The Difference with Will Martin, and welcome back. Another week gone by. How you doing, Jermaine?
Will, I have to say, I missed you, man.
Yeah, I feel like I should have been missed.
Yeah.
Yeah. My absence should have responded. You should have responded that way to my absence there.
No, man, but it's always good seeing you.
Oh,
Man.
Good to be seen and not
viewed.
There we go. Absolutely. Mr. Debo, you doing all right back there?
I was wondering if you even cared.
I really care. I care most about you.
Nope.
Oh, geez. It's a little much there, but
man,
I missed you, man. I kind of, was wondering, were you still working here? What was going on?
See, you see, this is what happens, right?
Yeah,
this is what had happened. We had some really fast-moving news last week, and we had already lined up Gideon Verdin to come in here, the TMJ 4 reporter for Northside Milwaukee, and the problem with the news is it keeps breaking, right? And so we were all lined up ready to go to talk about a really special news special, maybe a first for TMJ4 and definitely a first for Gideon Verdin, when another piece of news broke. And so he had to actually go and cover that. And, I thought it was more important to come here, but apparently he had to go and take care of everybody else knowing what was going on too. So today we have with us finally, Gideon Verdin is returned to the station. Return to my show,
back, man. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming. And last week we were all lined up, and then a jury verdict came down, and so you had to go and cover that, right?
Yeah.
So this was for the Sade Robinson. Other people refer to it as the Maxwell Anderson trial.
Yeah.
To my mind, I'm not trying to spend a whole lot of time on that dude, but. But the fact that Sade Robinson, beautiful young lady who was murdered and dismembered, and that is, we have a lot of folks that are unfortunately killed in this city. But the idea that you take it one step further and for the dismemberment is just something that's almost unheard of here.
Yeah.
No,
it's a super tragic story. And that morning, we knew the verdict was upon us. We just didn't know when. So I got the call to be on verdict watch. So basically stick around down at the courthouse until something comes in.
Right.
And so when you get that call, you don't know if it's going to be a day, 3 days, a week. You just don't know.
Right.
And so I talked to my coworkers and they're like, yeah, we're going to be on this for a minute.
Which means you're going to be on this for a minute.
Put the phone down. 15 minutes later, we got a verdict. Boom. It came in so quick.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of a shock, and we kind of had to mobilize and move quickly. And my goal was to kind of get the pulse of the community. I've been following the trial like everybody else on television and in the news. And my biggest concern this whole time has been how it's impacting people in the community, specifically Black women.
Mm-hmm.
I chose not to watch the trial very closely because it just was very grueling, graphic.
Yeah.
And, the justice system can kind of be hard on our people, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
When we think it's a clear-cut case, then all of a sudden we get smacked in the face with a verdict that just ain't right.
Right.
And so I was really prepared for something bad. And, talking to the community, I was preparing for the worst.
Oh, wow.
Mentally, as much as the evidence was pointing to him, I just thought, I was afraid for the city in case this went the other way. And so listening to Black women who were watching the trial every single day, knew every detail. That's where I got all my news of Black women in my life, because they were watching closely. And it must have been very traumatizing for them if it was traumatizing for me as a Black man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, let's back this up. Let's talk a little bit about, so this comes out of Sade Robinson, 19 years old, college student, working at was Pizza Man that she was working for, Pizza Shuttle, and so she, had her life together, doing her thing. It's from what I understand about the case is that she met Maxwell Anderson, who also was working at a different restaurant at one point in time. So she's 19, he's 34. They go on a date. And I think this is the lesson. You've got a daughter, Jermaine, right?
Me too.
I think,
I have a 20-year-old also.
Right. And so, I just think for folks now, I don't have kids, but I think, it must be like the very first thing you think of.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very cautious with mine. So I try to meet them and talk with them just to see where their head is, because I know, what it's like to be their age. So they're just now learning how to be 28, 29. I've already been there.
Right.
So I can kind of guide them through them. And
it's got to be very scary. But the idea that you could go on a first date and it be your last anything, to be out there. So she, ends up, it appears that she went back to his house in the process as well. And so it ends up being that she is reported missing. So they go on a date. She's reported missing on April 2nd of 2024. So in terms of cases, this actually moved pretty quickly. They then began to find, and I apologize to the audience, they began to find body parts along Lake Michigan. A leg first, and then the torso, etc., and just very gruesome, including down to Waukegan. There were parts that were found, and then that progressed into really within looks like within a couple of weeks, they then identified him as a suspect. So again, in terms of cases, they moved pretty quickly to find him. Now this is in contrast to what we're going to talk about later, where they had a suspect pretty quick in this case, but we're going to talk later on in the interview about some cases where there are no suspects, where they don't have folks, right?
Yes.
So, just your reaction to just how this kind of moved along and these issues.
When we're in the newsroom, we hear a lot of really shocking stuff that comes over the desk. And so sometimes it gets overwhelming when one day you come in, someone's found a body part, the next, or the first day someone's missing, then you find in body parts. And so it was a lot. Just mentally as a journalist, knowing something big is coming as things are developing. And, I have coworkers who've been working on this since the beginning, and it definitely takes a mental toll on you. Me having a daughter and sharing the same concerns a lot of family members out there shared. And in all honesty, I kind of just took a step back as this was developing. Because again, as I mentioned, like my focus was how the community can move forward now that the verdict has come in, or now that, someone has been convicted of this crime. How do we move forward as a community? How do we heal? What do we teach our daughters?
Yeah, what lessons come out of it? I think, Devo, you've got a daughter as well, right?
Yeah, I've got 4 daughters.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So, one of the things that came out of it in terms of, for me, of course, you don't know all these things about somebody on the front end, right? And so, not to blame Sade for trusting folks, right? But just to say that you don't always know people's backgrounds, even if you look into it, even if you're trying. It came to pass, and people found out later on that he had a rather lengthy criminal record. The domestic violence, drunk driving, disorderly conduct. So there were some things out here, but again, she may well not have ever known about all of that.
Do any of us really know the people we meet and we, initially date and go out with and stuff like that? We don't. And, I've heard Black women tell me, like, I'm going to give up on dating for a while.
Wow.
I'm not even going to date.
Okay.
Because of what happened and how they're feeling about meeting new people. It's just a different playing field now after the Sade Robinson case. And I think especially for Black women who are just paying a little closer attention to the people that they meet, the people that they, date. Online dating is a big thing now, and people are like taking a real risk just meeting strangers and going out on dates. And the conversations we're having with our children, I know, a lot of it for me is just listening, because I have a 19, 20-year-old who's not always comfortable telling her dad what she's always doing. but just letting her know that you can come to me for some advice when it comes to people. I can help, you know, you navigate this dating life,
Yeah.
because she's 20. She wants to meet people, wants to go to the mall, wants to hang out with friends and things like that. And
Yeah.
it's all innocent. I'm sure what Sade wanted was just, an innocent
Absolutely.
situation. And here it is, you know,
And it just ends tragically. I
it
think
ends tragically.
one lesson for me, as we said, you don't always know the backgrounds of the people. There's not always a Jermaine. Let's just be real. There's a lot of families where there's not a father
Yeah.
figure there. It's somebody who can really, smoke this out and figure out, is this guy right? But also I just think the idea of, going to a public place, we have to kind of come back to some of those lessons that maybe we all learned earlier about, hey, having that date at a public place. Apparently they went to a restaurant where he used to work, but somehow they ended up back at his place. And I think that's one of those lessons of, hey, don't, never, never, never go back to someone's home.
Yeah.
Especially you don't, if it's your first time really getting to know them, and also making sure that other friends know, other family members know, where are you at? Who are you with? What are you doing?
And a lot of the Black women I've talked to in the community since also have got the life alert. Because it was a key part of this whole investigation and finding out where Sade was.
About this
and
a little bit more.
I hadn't known about it much at all either, but I'm going to use it for my daughter as well, and just those precautions. I don't care if it's an air tag. I used to stuff an air tag in my daughter's backpack, when she go on her bike rides and things like that, so I knew where she was. But the life alert, I think, is kind of something new, at least for me and a lot of people in the community who didn't know how valuable it was as far as keeping track of your loved ones and family.
Right.
And
I think we used to think, I think we only thought of them as for seniors.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, that's originally how it was advertised, was, hey, this is how you can make sure your senior is
shout
doing
out to that mother for having the foresight to, have her daughter on that. I mean, that's
Sheena Scarborough.
Yeah.
I believe is the mother's name. And
I mean, without it, we may never have been able to solve her murder.
Yeah. Well, and I think for a minute they didn't know that she had actually made it back to his house, right? And as part of the storyline, it was that they seized the phones, right? The electronics. They got his communications, and in that they found pictures of her at his house.
Yeah.
That he had deleted. Well, we can't say that were deleted, right? That were deleted, and finding those demonstrated that she had been there.
Yeah.
And so I in reading some of the coverage about this story, that seemed to be a turning point for some of the jurors.
Yeah.
That to see those pictures and to know that they had been deleted from his phone.
Yeah.
And that's another one of these things that people should learn. I don't know why these folks don't learn it already. Is nothing goes away electronically, right? Nothing goes away online. If it existed once, it still exists somewhere, right?
Yeah. I just want to shout out the Black women in the community, because they have been so strong through all of this. They have been paying attention to the trial. They've been educating us. And I can't imagine how tough it is going through that in a city that, like, this case polarized us all. But I think for Black women, it hit them the hardest. And people were paying attention, and other communities were watching. But I think specifically Black women, this hit home, because, they've experienced the fear of, abuse or neglect, and just being a Black woman in society, the way Black women are treated in this country. And then having to just wait on pins and needles on the edge of your chair for this verdict. I mean, it was just probably one of the toughest times in Milwaukee we've had as a community.
I'd say maybe for as far back as the Jeffrey Dahmer situations, right? In terms of a story being a murder story being that big.
And it hits our people very closely, because we have a lot of missing Black girls in this community. Milwaukee has, problems with human trafficking, and You know, there's still young Black girls out there missing today that,
and some of them missing for years.
Yeah. And, you know, it doesn't always make the top of the news. It doesn't always make the headlines. It doesn't even always make the follow-ups.
Yeah.
But as a community, we don't forget about these people. It sticks to us.
Let me ask you this. I mean, just kind of veering off this,
Sure,
we'll talk a little bit more about the case, but how do you make decisions about what you cover, right? I mean, as you say, some of these missing persons cases, you know, they're not people the vast majority of us would know. They're not celebrities.
Yeah.
How do you make a decision as to, you know, does it make the news or not?
Yeah, so, you know, as a reporter who grew up here, I kind of pride myself on at least having somewhat of a pulse on the community and what's important. So I try to look and listen a lot, and I check all my emails and all the texts people send me with news pictures and stories. And then I also just do my own research and digging. And if I find something that I think is impactful to this community or matters, or someone brings it to me, typically, you know, I bring it straight to my boss and say, you know, this is the story I want to tell. Thankfully, I get a lot of support from my bosses, and they know, you know, I'm from this community. I probably know it better than they do. And so, you know, they give me a lot of freedom in order to tell the stories I want to tell. Sometimes it's all dependent on if someone's willing to talk. You know, there could be a missing girl. It could be something that we all want to discuss. But if the immediate family doesn't want to talk about it,
right,
it really kind of straps us as journalists, because you don't want to tell that story without honoring the parents' opportunity to give us, you know, the real story.
Right.
And then also sometimes you get held back on stories because information can't be verified right away. You know, it's one thing for a person to say my loved one passed away, but we also have to get that information verified by MPD, the medical examiner, Milwaukee Fire Department, just to do our due diligence to make sure we're telling the story accurately.
Yeah, because you obviously don't want to be on and you have to retract the story.
Yeah, and sometimes those moving parts come together very quickly. Sometimes they don't.
Right.
And, you know, I'm one to, as a journalist, when I talk to people who are dealing with traumatic times, you know, my goal isn't always to just come in and get the interview right away, but to be helpful. And, you know, if they don't want to talk, I understand, because I may not want to talk either if I was dealing with something like that.
Sometimes it's a not yet.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And even the past few weeks, I've been dealing with a lot of like stories related to homicides and shootings in the city, where the next day I'm literally at someone's door that I don't know, knocking, asking, is there anything I can help with? Would you like to tell this person's story?
Wow.
Can we tell this story so they don't become a statistic?
I think that's a great approach, because we don't always see that kind of approach. I think it's much more clinical sometimes coming from the press.
Yeah.
And so to have somebody come in a much more compassionate way.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, it's the only way to do it, because my job is important. Yeah, telling these stories is important, but I really want to help the community. I want to use the platform and resources to help people. So I meet people that deal with trauma, I meet people that deal with mental health, and experts. And so if I meet a family who's struggling with these things, whether it be domestic violence or mental health, I want to share those resources. And if they want to tell me the story, great, that's a plus. But my first thing is just to be helpful, be an asset. And you know, it's tough. These are the toughest times of people's life. You know, before you get the mom's interview, you know, she's crying to you for 45 minutes before you turn on the camera. You know, and so I realize it never slips my mind how tough these moments
are. And these are real people. I remember Jermaine and I, we were on, Jermaine, I actually went back and listened to the show back when we talked about reckless driving. You talked about your son and you know, the impact on him, but also then just kind of, you know, I remember distinctly the mother who called in, who was still just literally broken about her son and how
that happened right over
yeah. And so, you know, just the fact that she lost her son in just some absolute foolishness, you know, these high speed chases and et cetera going on. And just knowing the humanity of it all. But
I mean, it takes amazing courage, and I always admire people for just having that courage to share, and it's not easy. So
and as you talked about that sort of giving them that space, I remember we had to give her some time where she was just on the line. She was not here in the studio. We weren't with her, but she was still crying and as broken about that loss
Mhm.
long after it had happened.
Yeah.
And just knowing that that's a lifetime of brokenness that
Yeah.
she's experiencing.
I want to change the way like our community views reporters and journalists. You know, I would like to be like a uh uh just a source or a platform for them to share, you know,
Mhm.
rather than us just coming in the community, covering it and leaving. You know, how can we help keep that legacy alive?
Yeah.
How can we help you pay for that funeral? How can we help you, you know,
This is a
grieve?
neighbor.
Yeah,
I
this
mean,
is a
just being a
neighbor.
real neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. And just taking the time to show people that it's not about the news story. When news is gone, I'll still have to live in this community.
Yeah.
I'll still have to show my face and uh, you know, I take pride in just really taking the time to hear people's story.
Yeah.
You know, even if the camera's not rolling, because it gives me a better perspective and allows me to do my job better.
Well, I think, I know you talked about you prepared yourself mentally for the worst.
Yeah.
I think it was incredible that the jury went out, right? And in what it was an hour,
Yeah.
less than an hour, that they came back guilty verdict on all counts: intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson. He'll actually receive his sentence in August,
Mm.
but that it looks like it will be a mandatory life sentence. But as usual, what sounds like what it is isn't always what it is, right? Mandatory life sentence. Apparently, you can be on supervision for some of that. And so that'll be the question as to whether or not he gets any of that part where he's out and being supervised as opposed to being in
Wow.
prison, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I haven't thought that far, but that's
Yeah.
definitely something to think about. And I'm sure people are concerned. Um, I don't, you know, from the black women I was talking to in the community after the trial and the verdict, everybody was in some ways happy that he was found guilty, but also still extremely saddened that Sade's life is gone.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's like that balance of emotion, you know,
And
happy, but also just
yeah.
terribly sad that Sade isn't able to grow up to be the woman that she could be. And
And
so
it's
is there
incredible.
any really justice?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, just on that point, the fact that she's not only gone, but that we don't even really know to this day why.
Yeah.
You know, why he did this.
Yeah. And you know, part of the reason I was so nervous is because I would hear chatters about, oh, there's no solid evidence, it's all circumstantial.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the justice system. And
Wow.
as black people, we know the justice system has failed us many, many times.
Well, we're going to talk about some of that right after this break.
Between me and you, what's the difference?
Uh, but thankfully, the fact that in that case they identified the suspect quickly. Now, just a year later, which I'm saying a year later, but which I think is actually pretty quick for the justice system. The jury came back last Friday, June 6th, in the morning, with a guilty verdict on all counts: intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson. It looks like he will receive a mandatory life sentence. Questions about what that really actually looks like, but there's one last thing. We were talking about just the speed with which, and the fact that there was someone identified in this case. But one of the things that I found fascinating is just in kind of reading back through the story, there was blood reportedly found in his basement, and it was not her blood. And so the thing that I'm walking away with is I read it as a single line in one of the many stories.
Yeah,
but it's just stuck with me.
Of course it did.
Are there more victims out here?
Yeah, this is the biggest question.
Because the fact that they said they tested the blood and it was not Sade's. What is that?
And it wasn't his either.
That is exactly right. And so you kind of really wonder, okay, to me, it makes me wonder if there's an unsolved case here.
Now, I don't know if you gentlemen have heard. I don't know if it's just stuff that's out there. Allegedly, another employee from
Peace Shuttle
where
missing.
she worked
was it 2022?
Yeah, something like that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what, I don't know, but this is what I find amazing, and we talked about just at least our feeling that our community is not always taking us seriously, that people don't move as aggressively. So the idea that they could be a one-liner in a story that, hey, they tested the blood, it's not his, it's not hers,
and that's it,
and there's no more references in the story, right?
And I don't even understand that, because if that's not his blood or her blood, why wouldn't they do an investigation to see who blood it is?
And maybe it's a great,
maybe that's down the pipeline, hopefully.
Correct. And
you would hope, but I also had heard rumblings off record about other things found in his home that were super suspicious.
Wow.
That couldn't be linked directly to Sade, so weren't considered a high priority. Investigations and how they work behind the scenes, I'm not too sure, but those things right there raise an eyebrow for me.
Right.
And I'm no professional investigator, but I would like to know more.
But you are a professional reporter.
Yeah.
And this is where we're talking about originally this case that was solved. There are a lot of unsolved homicides in this community, and so you actually got a chance to do something that, as I understand it, may actually be a first for WTMJ.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
TMJ4, and that you actually co-hosted a 1-hour, no commercial special on unsolved homicides, and you brought together both loved ones of several individuals who were murdered in Milwaukee, and you got in the room folks from the homicide division of Milwaukee Police Department, as well as folks from the district attorney's office, including Kent Laverne, the district attorney himself.
Yeah. The special is called Voices for Justice. If folks out there want to watch, you can Google TMJ4 Voices for Justice. As you mentioned, it's an hour-long special. It was sponsored by the Wisconsin Medical College, which made an hour-long special, which made it commercial-free. And it aired recently. It was a huge project, a huge thing I took on. And it's still having a big impact, I think, behind the scenes in the community. I'll rewind a little bit. Voices for Justice, the idea, the concept of this special was brought to me by a beloved community member. Her name is Deborah Gillespie. Okay. Normal community member. She's been in the community. She's exceptional, but she's been in the community working on the ground just like other people. She lost a son due to violence, and she
Wow.
started Mothers Against Gun Violence.
Mhm.
And for years, she's been an advocate for other mothers to help them navigate the trauma, the justice system, the healing. She gives them resources. She works with dozens and dozens of mothers. She came to me with the idea in an email, and this is just how, amazing things can work. Just an idea. What if we get these families in front of the DA and the investigators? In my mind, of course, I'm thinking that'll never happen. I can't even get them to respond on, a homicide that happened last night.
Mhm.
But it's Deborah's relationships that she's built with MPD,
Yeah.
these investigators, the community, that garnered that respect for them to respond in the way that they did.
Oh, wow.
This could not have happened without Deborah Gillespie. She's not a journalist. She's not a,
So
news reporter.
this is somebody who's out here as
Yeah,
normally part of
this
the
is-
audience is actually helping drive.
Yeah, this is what we talked about last time, the idea of active listening,
Mhm.
of us active listening to the pitches you send us and then acting on it. And so Deborah picked all these families because she knew their stories
Oh,
and their
wow.
significance. So there's one family who lost a loved one 20 years ago.
Yes.
There's one family who lost a loved one last year.
Mhm.
There's a wife. There's a father.
Right.
There's a sister. There's a white woman. It was the perfect range to represent Milwaukee. There was also a Latin family,
Mhm.
but because of the grief they're still dealing with, trying to get justice for their loved one, they kind of backed out.
Yeah.
And respectfully, I get it. And but I got to give true credit to Deborah, just as an individual in this community who had a vision and believed in me to try to execute it. And so with the support of my station, we were able to put this together. And I profiled each family to talk about
Yeah.
their loss, and then intertwined that with the interview, the open discussion with
Yeah.
MPD and the DA.
Yeah. Before we get to the families, talk to me about, like, you get this email. How do you take this back and say, here's what I really want to do?
I sat on it for a couple days and thought about things, because I didn't believe it could happen. I don't.
And you aren't the only reporter in town, so it's not like you get to waltz in and say, I want to take an hour's worth of time.
Yeah.
What do you normally get for a
2 minutes.
story? You get 2
2
minutes.
minutes.
So you
tell
went
a
in
story.
and you tried to tell somebody, like, look, I want a whole hour on the station.
Yeah, it kind of worked like that. I didn't know it was going to be an hour, I guess, towards the middle of the progress. But yeah, like I'm just very blessed that I have coworkers that believe in me
Mhm.
and believe in the vision and can see my sincerity and passion on these stories. And first thing I told Deborah to do was I connected her with my boss. I said, share that vision with her. So when I meet with her, she kind of gets what, your passion. And she did. And my boss loved the idea. And, we're a community voices station who's, when we do stories, we don't always talk to the officials. We don't always talk to the aldermen or the policeman. We want to talk to the people on the ground who are most impacted. So if you've been watching TMJ4, you may have noticed a shift on how we cover news. It's not about the officials anymore. It's about you, the people, and how these decisions officials make are going to be impacting you. So this was
Yeah.
like right up the alley of what our new direction and mission is.
Okay.
And I a lot of times looking back on it now, it's like it's got to be God that put all this together, or at least gave us Deborah, because she's just an amazing person who's, I think, put here to connect people, to heal. And I'm just kind of just a piece of the puzzle in a bigger picture of her, doing this great service to families who are struggling with gun violence. You know, this has been a really tough time for them to have to revisit these things. They had to be very courageous. A lot of times we went right back to the scene where the loved one was killed.
Yeah.
The loved
The
one,
father, I think you had a situation where the father went back
yeah,
with you.
and his son's killer apparently lives a block away from that gas station.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine the courage that I have to take to come back and walk through that with a person you don't know. And I just thank them for that. And a lot of it was based on the hope that they could just get in front of some of these important people who they've been trying to talk to for months.
Yeah.
One of the striking things that really hit me is every family I talked to, I asked them to call their investigator in front of me. and the phone just rang
Yeah.
and rang and rang. And I'm not talking like 2 minutes. I'm talking 5, 10 minutes.
Wow.
The phone just rang and I recorded it. No voicemail. No, hey, we'll leave a message. No, hey, this is secretary for so and so. Imagine if they did have information leading to the case or could help, and you're just on the phone and it's just ringing. So for me, that was like a practical problem I feel could be solved easily if we
Mhm.
get the right people in this room and say, look, can we get a voicemail system?
Right.
Look, can we hire somebody to
The
answer
next
these
point
phones?
is you got to have somebody answer the voicemail.
Right. But it's like I'm a practical problem solver
Yeah.
kind of person.
Yeah.
And though these are dynamic, issues that deal with a lot of moving parts, let's get to the basis of it. How can we get these families a response quickly, or at least a place where they can feel like their cases aren't being forgotten?
Well, there's 3 pieces to the story, right? So you first had to go sell the idea to a station.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So apparently, Saint Deborah got you that far, right? So you got that far in the story. How did you then get the families to agree to do this?
Again, that was Deborah. Deborah spoke directly to the families.
Well,
I got
Deborah's doing a whole lot of work.
I'm telling you, I'm giving her producer credits on this piece. We're
Okay.
submitting it for an Emmy, and I couldn't have did it without her.
Wow.
She reached out to all the families and connected me with them by email. I reached out to them and spoke to them all individually.
So it started with somebody they trusted already.
Yeah.
It's just not, you didn't come in cold.
And I met with them outside of the cameras.
Okay.
Many of them to just talk first.
So it wasn't that knock on the door with the camera rolling.
And then, because some of them, even up to the last minute, weren't ready.
Yeah.
And we had family members who wanted to sit in that when the cameras started, the pain was too much and they left.
Okay.
And so for the people that you do see in the special, man, the courage that they have is unbelievable. We got a mom in there who's, her son was shot in the home she lives in to this day. Wow. And she refuses to leave the home, because that's where she raised her kids. And, she started a daycare in his honor. But she still lives in that home, in that community. And so,
wow,
it's a level of courage I don't think I'll ever have or haven't had to even face. And then Deborah also got us MPD and
wait.
The DA.
I'm coming to that part because I really want to understand. That's the piece.
Yeah.
Now, it's miraculous enough that you got the first 2 out of 3, but the idea that, in this special, you actually literally got families of folks, in some cases, who were murdered 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Sitting in the same room.
Right across from the DA.
Okay. With folks that you say the phone's ringing for 10 minutes, right? How did you get the district attorney and Milwaukee Police Department homicide detectives to sit down in that room and be on camera for an hour to talk to families about all of this?
1, 2 words. Deborah Gillespie.
Man,
she
Deborah Gillespie, she should get.
She should. She emailed and called these people. She's had relationships with them.
Wow.
She's built relationships with the district attorney's office. She is like a boots on the ground, real community advocate. She's just not all talk. And it's her relationships that were able to do this. I don't think as a reporter, if I would have set this up and pitched it, I don't think they would have, because we have a unique relationship with MPD where, they need us, we need them, but sometimes we're not always seeing eye to eye, and they don't always like the way we cover the stories.
Yeah.
We don't always like the way they disseminate information.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a bit of a push-pull kind of relationship. And although I do have some good relationships with some of the people behind the scenes who help to coordinate these things with MPD, there's always this feel that a reporter's looking for a gotcha moment, or we're looking to catch you up in a lie or expose you. And Deborah was like that medium that I guess let their guards down, that showed that these are humans and people, and whatever she did, she got them to agree to it. I told you off record, like, I was surprised. I didn't think that they would agree to this.
As soon as you told me the concept, first of all, I gotta say, I saw the commercial for this and DVR'd it immediately. And so I knew I wanted to see how you had done this, right? Just the mechanics of how you had laid this out, and how these folks could all be in the same rooms, and knowing that emotions would be raw, how you got everybody to be in there, and to be okay with being there with each other. But you had Captain James Hutchison, who's in charge of the Milwaukee Police Department homicide
top
division.
2 investigators.
Yeah, and Inspector Paul Lowe was there as well.
And I want to shout out them because I talked to them off camera. They're from the area. They grew up in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
I got an honest feeling that they care.
Yeah.
They care. You know how you talk to somebody and tell this is their city too.
Right.
And as you saw in the special, they were very forthright.
Right.
And
I mean,
apologetic.
they said literally during the very first minutes of the of this hour-long piece, we let you down. And to have somebody come on, I just would think, man, this is the most
blew my mind too.
Yeah, the idea that somebody would come on and make that statement, and to make it that early in the hour, you're like, well, where else is the rest of this going to go?
Right now,
if we're starting there, right?
I think when it comes to issues like racism, police brutality, injustice, we got to be able to come to the table and have those hard conversations. That's why we can't solve these problems in America, because we can't get the racist and the black man to sit across the table and talk. I mean, Malcolm X talked about it, when it comes to racism. The only way we'll be able to deal with it is to get them across the table and have the conversations nobody wants to have. So when that happened, I knew this was going to be moving in a productive, progressive direction.
Yeah.
We're not going to sit here and listen to sound bites or excuses on things. They're taking ownership and accountability.
Yeah.
And I just got to respect that. And every time I see those investigators, I thank them, because the next night after it aired, a young man was killed on 4th and North Avenue. And I pulled over and I watched investigators work till 3 a.m. on that case.
Wow.
So it's not like they don't care.
Right.
It's not like they're not working on these things. Have you ever watched a homicide investigation? They comb the streets. They work at this. It's tough. And then when you got them happening day in and day out, you know that department is exhausted. You know that department is overwhelmed.
On them. We're going to keep talking about this right after this break.
Thank you.
Difference between me and you, me and you, me and you. What's the difference between me and you, me and you?
All right, WNOV family, you are listening to The Difference with Will Martin, and my special guest today is Gideon Verdine, TMJ4 reporter. He is the reporter for our community. And so we've been talking about the Shadi Robinson case. We also have talked about Voices for Justice and the miracle being able to pull that off, to have all those folks in one room to talk about a really important subject, these unsolved homicides and what the system is really trying to do. You mentioned before we went to the break about just how hard they work. And I think the great part of the special was the way that you were able to acknowledge some of the shortcomings of the system and the way it's impacted families, the loved ones, but also just to be able to acknowledge that it's an incredibly tough, the work that they're doing is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It has got to take a mental and physical toll on people doing it.
Yeah.
And to know that you're out there fighting, and that, any number of these cases may never be solved.
Yeah. Yeah. What I take away from it all is that it's really something we got to do together as a community. Police are part of this community as well, and we just got to really work together because they got this really tough job and they're dealing with these homicides. We as a community also have to step up when we see these things happening. They can't really do their job without us participating in the process, and that means when you see something, not being afraid to say something, and especially in terms of these egregious murders. But I also wanted to mention how after the story aired, which again I'm encouraging everybody to go watch it online, just search Voices for Justice. After it aired, I got a chance to speak with a couple MPD officers raised in Milwaukee, who've been on the force for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
They hadn't heard about it, so when I told them initially, they were very defensive. Oh, we work really hard. We try. I said, no, just watch it. Just watch it.
Yeah.
They took the time to watch it. One of them was moved to tears, called me that night and thanked me, because I think they were willing to admit also that they get very wrapped up in the nuts and bolts of the investigation and miss the human side sometimes. Yeah. And that means everybody from the secretaries, when you go into the MPD investigative offices, or people answering phones, they're dealing with this every day.
Yeah.
And so it was so helpful to hear families about how they're dealing with this process on the other side of the investigation. And one of the officers happens to be in a position where she can make change, and decided to send it out to all of her fellow officers to ask them to watch it, to also, in hopes that they would get a kind of a reinvigorating feeling of like why we did this job,
why you're out here fighting crime.
And sometimes they got to be reminded. And she was just so thankful. And for me, I don't care about ratings or awards. For me, that made me feel like that is what this is for. Like someone who's from Milwaukee, who's been on the force 20 years, who's behind the scenes, who actually can make a difference, saw the special, sent it out to fellow officers, put it on the roll call, and it's starting to make some administrative changes behind the scenes. She told me she called the right people to make sure that these phones are getting answered now. And, and I've done some follow up with the families. The DA has met with some of the families personally to look at the case again. Not all the families yet, but some of them have had that one-on-one meeting that they were yearning for. Yeah. Off camera, me and you, let's look at our case again. Because, the statute of limitations is forever on a homicide. So they can always come back and revisit the evidence if they're moved to do so. And so that, for me, those families getting in front of those people outside of the cameras was enough to just be satisfied.
Oh, I think it's awesome. And I'm glad it was a first for you to co-host a new special like this.
Yeah, and more to come. The medical college wants to continue. So look for more Voices of Justice dealing with other issues, Voices for Justice dealing with other issues in the community that we're facing, from domestic violence to immigration issues, or being deported, to mental health, and just a wide array of stories where we can bring these voices to the front. And I also want to mention that, I have plans to do a story that brings young people who are not in the justice system, but who have survived the quote unquote trenches of Milwaukee. And now they're getting scholarships. They're going on to do positive things with their life and plan to come back.
Beautiful.
And so there will be another side of this series that highlights those powerful, positive voices in the community.
You're not just doing crimes, right?
Yeah. No.
So you're also going to be involved with Juneteenth, which I appreciate the federal government making my birthday a federal holiday. I feel like that's how it should be treated.
Right? I thought my birthday was cool.
Yeah, and I was also a Father's Day baby as well. So it's
wow.
I feel very special.
Yeah, nothing like Juneteenth.
But you're going to be involved with Juneteenth, right?
Yep. I'll be doing the opening ceremony after the parade. So I'll be there, and then I'll be reporting live in the parade as well. We'll be broadcasting the entire Juneteenth parade on TMJ4.
Oh, beautiful. And WNOV will be there. We'll be there all day. That's, we will be making it. So, look for WNOV. So I see you got your finger on that trigger over there, Jermaine.
Well, the old clock on the wall says that's all.
Yeah.
And I know it'll be after Juneteenth when you return, but certainly we'll broadcast live as well throughout the parade. We'll have it on both our platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and then of course on the grounds we will broadcast live from Rise and Grind Coffee Shop.
Oh man.
So make sure you put it on your list of things to do before you start celebrating your birthday.
Thank you. Hey, I was voluntold to come on down to Juneteenth,
pretty much,
and be a part of the celebration, man.
There you go.
So it's going to be a huge day. My birthday, Freedom Day. It's a wonderful day.
I know we got to get out of here. When is Racine celebrate there?
I think that was last week.
They did it already?
Yeah. I think it was last week. I heard it.
I'm going to go with what Jermaine said.
Okay.
Beautiful. But hey, WNOV family, thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Gideon, for coming in.
Anytime.
And thank you, Mr. Debo. Thank you, Mr. Jermaine.
Yes, sir.
This has been awesome. And so let's come on back together and do it again next week.
Let's do it.